Okay. There we go. All right. Sorry, it took me a second to figure all of that out there. So my name is Mary Hannah Schwarzen, and I am doing a lesson on World War I and the home fronts in World War I. And so this specific lesson is designed for 9th graders. And this is also the lesson plan that I chose to be my virtual lesson plan. And so this one is mainly geared towards being long distance over like a Zoom call or something. This is similar to what I would do as I teach my like French students that I tutor and such. So without further ado, go ahead and share my screen here. We can jump into the lesson. Okay. So this particular lesson is on the American home front in World War I. And so this is going to be the start of an entire unit on the World War I home fronts. And we're going to look at several different countries, but we're going to start with the most familiar one to us, which is the American home front, because that's, where we live. And so it's going to be a bit more of an easy start for us as we jump into learning about World War I. It's something that we're a little more familiar with. So first things first, I always like to talk about what we're learning today and what we're going to do. So today we are going to learn the definition of a home front and why it's important to war. We're also going to learn about what wartime initiatives in World War I. We're specifically going to learn what they are, how they work, and how they affect war. And so specifically in this lesson, we're going to start by focusing on American World War I initiatives. And just to give you kind of an idea of where we're going to be at the end of this unit, you're going to come up with your own wartime initiative as kind of a project-based learning product, and you're going to complete that with marketing art. So coming up with a poster, kind of what we're going to look at starting today, and then having a general outline of what goals you plan to meet with that initiative and how you plan to accomplish those goals. That sounds like a lot, but it's going to make a lot more sense once we finish up this lesson and we start into this particular unit. So let's get started. So this is the specific state standard that this lesson is going to meet, which is analyzing the political, economic, and social ramifications of World War I on the home front, including the role played by women and minorities, voluntary rationing, Committee on Public Information, opposition by conscientious objectors, and Schenck versus the United States decision, just to give anybody watching this an idea. So when we think of World War I, we tend to think of the battles. We tend to think of the big events. We tend to think of the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Maybe we think of Sergeant York. Maybe we think of progress in weapons developments. Actually, I'll kind of turn this over to you, class. What do you typically think of when you hear the words World War I? Kind of pause there for a second, let you guys think about that, give me some answers. So those are all great responses. And those are all absolutely correct, right? But I bet you haven't given much thought to thinking about the fact that there is more to World War I and more to war than just the battles itself. In fact, a war has two fronts. That's going to be the war front and the home front. All right. So that leads us to a question. What is a home front? Any thoughts on that? What is a home front? Well, so by definition, a home front is the civilian population and activities of a nation whose armed forces are engaged in war abroad. And so that means that if we were at war right now, you guys would be the home front because you're in 9th grade. And so you are the people still within our nation's borders. You're not out fighting those battles. So if we were to have a war, you guys would be the home front. So there are some key factors of a home front, all right? And those key factors are scarce resources and rearranged societal norms. When a country's at war, scarce resources means that it's sending a lot of its resources out of its borders to its soldiers. You kind of want to feed your soldiers, right? You want them to have food so that they can keep fighting and win the war that you are embroiled in, right? So that, of course, means by economic standards that there aren't as many resources available in the country itself. And so in order to ensure that everybody has enough to go around, a government that is at war will decide how much of certain valuable items each family can receive. They might limit the amount of loaves of bread, for example, that you can buy from as many as you want to, just 3 a week. Okay, because they're taking the rest of that bread and they're sending it overseas to their soldiers who are fighting for them so that they have food as well. Because if you're fighting a war in another country, your enemies are not feeding you. You have to feed your soldiers. And so that is called rationing, when the government decides how much of a valuable item each person within a country can receive. And the rearranged societal norms is the second part of the home front. And so when a large portion of a country is away at war, they leave voids, they leave gaps in all aspects of life. If you are fighting overseas as a soldier, then you're not able to be home with your family doing your job as a farmer, for example. Okay, or working at the bank, or helping raise your family, or running in a political office, right? Those are all jobs that now suddenly are open. Nobody's filling them. So this means that the people that are still in the country have to pick up the pieces and create a new workable societal system. And so in history, we usually find that these new norms continue to affect the country after war. For example, one thing we're going to kind of highlight later in another unit is that World War I had a huge impact on women's suffrage, which was the ability of women to vote. Okay, so the second question then that I'm going to ask you, and I want you to kind of ponder this, and then we'll pick it apart together in this lesson, is what is a wartime initiative? I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to think about that. You don't necessarily have to give me an answer to this one, just kind of ponder it. So a wartime initiative, by definition, is an organized effort of a portion of the populace of a country to relieve a scarcity, meet a need, or help the soldiers or civilians of a country at war. All right, so it's an organized effort of a group of people within a country who see that there is a need that needs to be filled during a time where other people aren't able to meet that need, and they decide to do something about it. Okay. Sort of like a charity, really, when you think about it. Have any of you all ever been to like Goodwill or helped at the food bank before? Similar concept here, all right? So there are some steps, though, to a good wartime initiative, and these are steps you're going to want to pay attention to as we're going through this particular lesson, because these are going to be the steps that you're going to want to measure your wartime initiative that you're going to come up with by the end of this unit, and see how well it stands up to these. So motivation, practicality, frugality, and morale boosting. So good initiatives are going to involve all of these. Motivation is going to be encouraging large groups of people to pitch in, maybe even on something they've never tried before. Practicality is going to be realizing that they are focusing on creating necessary resources that aren't going to be there. Remember, we talk about rationing and the idea that there's not as much food maybe to go around, or not as much wool or something, because you're making uniforms for soldiers, right? So recruiting people willing to learn or use the skills to get something done. Practicality, okay, and creating those resources. Frugality. Again, good initiatives are going to realize that times are hard and resources are scarce, and they're going to work within the restrictions that they have. All right. And then finally, morale boosting. This is almost one of the most important aspects of a good wartime initiative, because not only are they creating a useful product for people at home or at war, but they're bringing hope to people, and they're helping people feel like they're getting something done, and they're assisting their country in this initiative. So why is the home front important? This is where soldiers draw motivation and support from. From a resource standpoint, this is where all goods are created that can help a nation win a war. It's the vast majority of the people of the nation, because most people are still going to be home. And it's also the behind the scenes where organization fails or successes can mean success or defeat for that country in their war. All right. So that is why a home front is important. That is what a wartime initiative is. Taking both of those pieces of knowledge, let's jump into looking at some actual initiatives that were a part of World War I in America. So the American home front, while soldiers are fighting overseas in Europe, people are still at home and they're going to do everything they can. Referring back to the societal gap, right? Women were suddenly left to pick up the pieces as their husbands and sons fought in Europe. And the American government and other organizations realized that fighting a war involving citizens as well as soldiers. So they came up with a lot of different ideas. And as we talk about these, kind of start to be thinking about, okay, what kind of initiative could I maybe come up with as part of my project? So first and foremost, I'll actually pause kind of my teacher audio basically. At this point during the lesson, I would actually be referring to this C-SPAN video. It talks about different posters that were used during World War I as part of wartime initiatives and the processes that they went through to market their initiatives through these posters and kind of the things that go behind the scenes. We just look at the pictures, but kind of the thought process that went behind them. So giving students the ability to look at that. And then after watching that video, the Digital Histories link has a database full of different World War I propaganda posters and marketing posters for different initiatives. And so pulling up a couple of those for students to look at, and then also having printouts as well to hand around for students. That will give them the ability to kind of walk through these 3 inquiry questions below at this point in the lesson and get them involved and get them engaged so they're not just listening to a lecture. So those specific questions being what symbols were used to represent America, why would they choose these symbols, what aspects made a poster more or less successful, and then based on the images and wording, how are they hoping to motivate people in each poster? So obviously I can't quite do that because they don't actually have a classroom to do that with, right? But that's the idea there. So that having been said, we've looked at what initiatives look like, what they do for posters to get the word out. Let's look at a couple of different initiatives then that were real during World War I. So the first one is the Red Cross Knit-a-Bit program. And actually this particular program got started before America even entered the war. And kind of a quick pop quiz. Anybody remember when we joined the war? The war starts 1914 and we get involved in, yes, 1917. Perfect. So the Navy League works alongside the American Red Cross. They come up with the slogan Knit-a-Bit. Soldiers are issued uniforms that involve a blouse, which would be the shirt, the jacket, the pants, and 2 pairs of boots, but that's all they're going to get. They're not going to get any hats, scarves, etc. And that's fine for the summer months, but then when the winter months come along, it gets cold, right? And so all of a sudden they don't have any way to keep warm and they're suffering from getting too cold and getting ill because of that. They're having hypothermia issues and other illnesses like trench foot from standing in the mud all the time and freezing mud at that. All right. So they work together after April of 17 when we joined the war. They start helping amateur knitters. They send out patterns. They're in charge of delivering the knitted items that people are bringing into them. They offer classes to teach people who've never knitted before how to knit. You can actually see right here on the right-hand side, that's a picture of one of their different patterns that they sent out as well. And on top of that, not just telling people that there's a need and helping them figure out how to meet that need, they also bring in the competitive and community-based aspect of that. So this kind of relates back to those different steps, right? Those 4 steps to a good wartime initiative. They're motivating people by making it a competitive and community-based event. They start organizing things like knitting bees, offering prizes for the fastest knit or the best knit. And so they are boosting morale as well on top of that because they are engaging people and they're helping them feel like they're doing something and they're having fun while they're doing it. So these garments are lifesavers. Socks save soldiers from frostbite and trench foot so that they don't get sick from those. Hats and gloves to keep fingers and ears from frostbite. And then here's that other aspect of a good initiative, right? They are a morale booster at home in the trenches, because for the soldiers, it's nice to have that hand-knitted item from home that can remind them that somebody cares about them and that somebody is worth fighting for. But then for the women and men that are still here in the States who can't go overseas and fight, it's nice for them because they feel like they're doing something to help. And so right there is a picture of one of those famous knitting bees. And you can see that there's a variety of people there of all different ages. So the Knit a Bit campaign is highly successful. They gather about 370 million knit items in just a 3-year span. Everybody knits everywhere, and it leads to great morale both at home and on the trenches and saves countless lives. So that's one initiative. The second initiative is going to be the Victory Gardens and Canning Initiative. This is going to be a push for war gardens with the formation of the National War Garden Commission. Over 3 million gardens are grown, and once harvested, that's when they start canning as well. So take a look at this poster. We just kind of watched that video about posters and what they looked like in World War I and the different symbolisms and everything. Do we see any symbolism in this particular image? And yeah, maybe one student might point out, oh, red, white, and blue, and the stars and stripes and everything. That's a very American picture, right? So these organizations work with local people and communities to conserve food, and they even hold workshops with folks to teach them how to can. The idea being that there is a scarcity, so they're being practical and frugal. Those are 2 more of our 4 steps to a good wartime initiative, right? They are helping people create food, grow food, right? And then keep it so that they don't have to go to the grocery store as often. So they increase food production locally, meaning there's more food to send overseas to soldiers, and it relieves the pinch of rationing during the war by keeping resources on the table longer. And then a third initiative that we're going to look at is the Women's Land Army Initiative, which was originally a British concept, but one that took off in America as well. Gets started out of Barnard College. And you can see the poster there that they circulated around. Again, a lot of imagery, a lot of symbolism. So according to the Smithsonian Magazine, from 1917 to 1919, the Women's Land Army of America brought more than 20,000 city and town women to rural America to take over farm work after men were called to war. And they set it up kind of like an army. You can see the picture here. It's a bit of a stigma breaker as well, because if you notice, all of those women in that photo are not wearing dresses. They are wearing pants. And so this is going to be one of those big societal shifts that's going to impact people after the war. They're organized like an army. Women 18 and over are eligible to join as long as they pass physical exam and prove they're fit enough to tackle the demands of an agricultural job. And overall, farmers had a lot of great things to say about these women. So after having looked at these particular different initiatives, this is when I would start asking inquiry questions to the students, kind of gaining comprehension and an idea of how well they understood everything. So we'd walk through these after looking at all these initiatives. Why do you think they were successful? And then what aspects of these programs seem to have worked well? And can we think of any that maybe wouldn't have worked well? There's no easy yes or no question and answer to this. How did each of these initiatives achieve the steps to a good initiative that we talked about, those 4 steps that I highlighted at the beginning of the lesson? I kind of point them out throughout each initiative, but I'm also really hoping that students will pull all 4 from each initiative. So I kind of mentioned 2 each, but I want them to be able to go back and look at all of the different goals. And then what motivates community cooperation? Why do we see increased community cooperation during crises? Kind of a higher level critical thinking question there. And then thinking about modern times, are there any initiatives similar to these that are still around? So I would ask this in a classroom discussion kind of setting, but then finally, this would be the point where I would roll it over to them and say, okay, now it's time to do your own research. I've showed you several initiatives. You're going to go find out about another one. So breaking up into groups, y'all are going to be in these groups for the rest of this unit. You're going to research one more World War I home front initiative in America. And this is the criteria that you're going to have. You're going to answer these questions as you're researching. B, what did this initiative hope to accomplish? How did it go about accomplishing this goal? And then how did the initiative market itself, and did it use any symbolism? And the idea being is you guys are studying in these little groups, you look up this new initiative and answer these questions, be thinking about your own initiative that you're going to be coming up with in your groups. So again, your small groups that I'm dividing you up into right now to go look at these questions and everything and look up this new initiative, you guys are going to be working together throughout this entire unit to come up with your wartime initiative. And you guys are going to come up with a piece of art to go with it as a poster, and then also have a general outline as well. And then this will be where I would put my citations, which I did not do. Not yet, at least it is. So that would be kind of how I would roll with that. For a conclusion, you know, we've had a great discussion. I've really enjoyed hearing all of your thoughts, and you all have found some great initiatives. To recap, we talked about 4 good steps for a really good wartime initiative. Does anybody remember what those are off the top of your head? Perfect. And then on top of that, then I'll ask you, what is one thing that you took from this lesson? Maybe one of those initiative steps, one of those 4 steps, you know, frugality, practicality, motivation, morale booster. What was one of those that stood out to you that you're going to take and use as you are working on your wartime initiative? And so to kind of get them thinking through the process of recapping in their heads what we've learned, and then applying it to their own wartime initiative as well as for a conclusion. And there you have it. That is my lesson plan on the American home front in World War I.